Hey Papa, why you looking so down? I thought you liked this show.
I mean, I do, but I don't know, man. I feel like we should be in a better place already. You know what I mean? Because it's like we still have 50 Blades of Grey technically running the channel, and now we got a freaking plague doctor breathing down our necks. I just feel like life should be a lot better right now.
Oh, I understand, Papa, but listen, it's no longer 2020. Whatever happens then does not matter now because it's a new year. That means we're gonna have new challenges, new miracles. Man, it's gonna be a great time. Comprende? And plus, with the blessing of God, we are still together. So there's no loss for me. Comprende?
Yeah, I guess. You know what? I think we should start off this year right. I'm gonna actually review the game that this anime was based off. So you know what? I might as well do it. So thanks for the words of wisdom, Uncle.
Hey, anytime, Papa, but you're not gonna finish this episode? Man, where's your commitment?
Dragon's Dogma is one of my favorite games on the Xbox 360. When it was finally released on the PC, I was incredibly excited to dive back into the world and start up another of many playthroughs. At the time, however, I wanted to take a bit of a break from it and try something new. I personally believe life is too short to be tied to one game. We all will get old eventually. Philosophy aside, I figured with the animated series being released last year, now was a perfect time to finally give it another go and finally review it. For those unfamiliar with the title, Dragon's Dogma is an action RPG set in a high fantasy world. Your quest as the Arisen is to hunt down the dragon and get your heart back. Sounds simple enough, but does it still hold up years later, or am I just blinded by nostalgia?
I hope not, or 2021 is going to be looking incredibly bleak to start out with. So let's just move on. This is Dragon's Dogma. Cue the montage.
Starting the game up throws you right into the action as you take control of a character who may be important later on. This is when you're introduced to some of the many mechanics offered within. The tutorial is decent, but may feel a bit overwhelming for some. It ends with an awesome battle against the Chimera though, giving you a taste of what's yet to come.
Before I take a deep dive into the mechanics of this game, because it will be deep, I just want to make a couple comments on the story and the overall narrative.
Narrative-wise, this game gets a bit nonsensical towards the end. A lot of the characters you meet appear to have more significance than they actually do, while others just show up to get quickly disposed of. While the plot itself is lacking, the lore and world building is actually pretty solid. Starting in your small village of Casardis, you get a strong sense of community and friendship between the villagers. Everyone greets you as they see you walk by them, and as they go about their day. Also, Uncle Ramon's grandfather is the chief here, so you know it's a pretty close-knit Hispanic community.
Even though no one speaks Spanish or mentions being Hispanic, so I'm gonna stick with it anyways.
And that's because we don't need to, Papa. You already know that I'm Dominican and I don't have a Dominican flag. And that's because you can tell by the sound of my voice and my fashion sense. Comprende?
Graphically, this game never looked particularly well even at release, and even with the higher resolutions, it still doesn't look very impressive. However, the frame rate is much improved and stays consistent at 60 frames per second without ever dipping, and with the solid state drive, load times are basically non-existent. Despite the lack of graphical fidelity, I like how the cutscenes show your character in your current armor, and others even show all the members in your party, creating a sense of this being your own personal journey. Audio-wise, it's still as awesome as ever. The music in this game is incredibly captivating and emotional, especially during key moments of the story. The score here does a great job in elevating every situation, right down to the final moments. I even enjoy the tracks that aren't as intense like the one from your village in Casardis. It's a nice respite from the battles and journey ahead. It's honestly one of the best video game soundtracks, and I would highly recommend you pick up the Masterworks collection on Steam.
Should be called the Masterpiece Collection, but enough referencing more popular YouTubers than me. Let's take a deep dive into the gameplay. And oh boy, it's gonna be a long one.
After the prologue, you get the ability to create your character, and man, the character customization is just freaking awesome. You have so many options at your disposal to determine how your character looks, and not only for your face, but also your body as well. Fun fact, depending on your height and weight will determine various physical attributes for you. This applies to both genders, as you can make anything from a diesel chick to a tiny man.
Heck, I played this game so much back in the day that I actually created Taki. I tried to do that again for this review, then I realized how long it would take, how much time I put into it, and my results ended up being this. At least it's better than my freaking Sif pawn, which is this.
In the beginning, combat is very simple as you only have a handful of attacks and skills. You also only have 3 vocations to choose from: Strider, Fighter, and Mage. Each has a primary and a secondary weapon that can be equipped. I usually go with Strider as you start with 2 daggers and a bow. Your vocation ultimately determines the kind of equipment you can use. This not only goes for the weapons, but for the armor as well. Thankfully, the loot you find is pretty awesome, and some items even have unique properties such as daggers that do fire damage and certain armor that can regenerate your health. All the loot is also upgradable to level 3 and can even be dragon forged after beating a dragon. With each vocation, you gain vocation ranks and points that can be used to unlock new active skills and passive skills. Like any good RPG, you definitely feel a great sense of progression with the new skills. For example, the Strider can gain a passive ability to double jump, while the Fighter can gain an active skill to launch an ally with their shields. Both can be very useful with dealing with enemies and traversing the world. Once you make it to Grand Sorin, however, the amount of vocations you can choose goes up to 9, and the game really opens up here. My personal favorite class is the Magic Archer, as you can use both daggers and staves as a primary, as well as a magic bow as a secondary. The bow is unique not only for its magical properties, but it also hones in on enemies.
The builds and customization doesn't stop there, however, as we have one of the biggest selling points of the game, and that is the pawn system.
As an Arisen, you are granted access to pawns who will serve you to the best of their abilities. These pawns are created from other users who have also played the game. You have one particular pawn that will be your permanent one. As mentioned before, I created Sif and assigned her the warrior vocation, allowing her to be a two-handed weapons expert.
This would never happen, but Sif and Taki battling on the same team just sounds freaking awesome. And this is probably the closest that we're ever gonna get.
Man, I'm really worried about your aspirations, Papa. If this is all you want in life, you have to reconsider it. Comprende?
Whatever. While the pawns are able to be outfitted very similarly to your character, they unfortunately have limitations. I couldn't find a concrete reason for this, but pawns can only be assigned 6 of the 9 vocations. 3 hybrid classes, Mystic Knight, Mystic Archer, and Assassin, are not available for pawns.
The best explanation that I could find is just there wasn't enough time to develop the AI for these hybrid classes. However, I haven't found any official confirmation for this. If you guys have, please let me know in the comments below.
Speaking of the AI, games that rely on party combat like this lives and dies by this, and thankfully the pawn AI is very competent. I honestly was saved by them quite a few times from a last minute spell or by a well-timed strike. They'll often let you know of monsters' weaknesses during battle and what they will do to counter them.
This has led to one of the biggest complaints in the game, and that is the fact that your pawns won't stop talking.
While they are incredibly talkative, for some reason I wasn't that bothered by it, only with certain dialogue. I really only got annoyed when the pawns say, when the enemy really doesn't. Pawns gain knowledge about enemies the more you face them and by certain tomes you read. However, you can influence them on how to deal with various situations, as in their priority in battle, how talkative they should be, and even their demeanor. While this sounds pretty cool on paper, in execution, it's less than intuitive. Instead of a menu to pull up to change this, you need to sit your pawn down in the knowledge chair, but even from there, you still can't pick what exactly you want to change. He or she will just give you suggestions and you can pick the better of the options.
That was just on character customization and pawn customization, but what about the combat itself?
Nothing short of freaking awesome. For the best experience, I recommend that you use the controller for this. When it comes to the boss battles especially, this game is at its best. Many times, you can't just brute force your way through and have to get creative. You may have to keep your distance, use a certain element like fire, or even scale the beast and strike it at its weakest. Seeing this all play out with your pawns is just awesome.
It's like being in a superhero team trying to take down a mega supervillain, or like an anime where the side characters actually matter.
There's a good amount to find in the open world, but I have to give a shout out to when you finally come face to face with the dragon. It's a multi-stage boss that just feels epic all around, and the captivating music keeps you invested the entire time.
Did I mention you should buy the soundtrack on Steam yet?
The biggest thing to watch out for is your stamina. It's needed to perform various actions such as your active skills, running, and scaling monsters. Getting yourself tired is one way to get yourself killed, so having a curative live to restore stamina or having your pawns give you a pat on the back is vital.
But that's enough about the action part of things. What about the RPG side of it?
I mentioned how bizarre the story gets, but the main quests themselves definitely range in quality. One of the worst ones come early in the game that boils down to an overly long escort quest. I found the side quests to be far more enjoyable, as completing them can actually influence certain key events in the story. Speaking of, there's surprisingly a relationship mechanic with the characters. When doing actions for an NPC such as quests or giving gifts, you gain affinity with that person. Having a maxed out affinity has the potential to make them your romantic interest for the rest of the game. Usually a pink aura will glow around them for max affinity.
And in case you were wondering, gender actually doesn't matter, so you can basically have anyone romance anyone. But overall, this whole thing just feels tacked on. This whole romance part of the game feels tacked on. And honestly, the game probably would have been better without it.
Outside of the main and side quests, there are also requests that you can accomplish that appear on notice boards. These mainly involve defeating a certain number of monsters or monster type, escorting a character, or collecting a certain item or number of items. They are usually worth pursuing as you can get a large amount of experience, gold, and equipment. The biggest issue with the game at release was the navigation. The original fast travel system had you collect one-use fairy stones to travel to places with a port crystal. Basically, you need to place these crystals all over the map to travel to them. Thankfully, you are now given an internal fairy stone to travel around, but still need to place the crystals.
I don't mind this fast travel system because it rewards you for exploration. Plus, the port crystals remain in the same location on repeat playthroughs.
Speaking of, there's a new Game Plus function that carries over your data, and you can even play on hard mode if you choose to do so. I usually just stick to normal difficulty because this game is already challenging enough with everything thrown at you. And for some odd reason, there's also a speedrun mode, which I can't even fathom trying to complete something like that without ample preparation.
Everything I mentioned so far applies to the main game. However, there is also a Dark Arisen expansion pack where I honestly spent most of my time at.
Early on in your campaign, a mysterious woman will appear in the docks of Pow3rh0use. While you can tackle this during your first playthrough, I highly recommend you ignore this until your second. The challenges presented here are not for the faint of heart, or faint of good equipment. When speaking to the woman, she will take you to a new region known as Bitter Black Isle. Not much is known on why she takes you there, but that's her job to delve deep and find out.
For the lady. I really should get more props.
I honestly preferred the narrative here, as the story itself is much simpler and the mystery behind the woman and what caused the Dark Arisen is pretty compelling. While it does tend to bog itself with details at times, you feel the emotion during the final confrontation, and once again that amazing soundtrack chimes in. But the story is not what kept me playing for hours upon hours. We have a ton of new content here in the form of enemies, challenges, equipment, NPCs, and even some new mechanics. I'll start with some of the creatures here. Early on, you won't see much of anything too different. However, the deeper you go, the more complex and interesting the enemies become, especially the bosses. You'll need to even be doubly sure that your party can handle the challenges ahead, or you'll pay dearly.
They even were able to get this guy to make an appearance.
Yep. Somehow, they were able to get the freaking Grim Reaper in this game. At this point, you knew they were pulling all the stops to get everybody in here. This dude is honestly no joke. One slash at your pawns and they're gone.
I thought he was honestly unbeatable, but one of the challenges is actually killing him. I've put 100 hours into this game and I have yet to even best him. So honestly, if you were able to do it, my mask is off to you.
The original campaign was already challenging, but this expansion rides the line of being absolutely freaking frustrating. This is due to the new mechanic introduced in surprise bosses. Basically, from racking up a high kill count, the blood of the enemies attracts stronger monsters. This can include Death himself, and even can happen when already dealing with an incredibly tough enemy. I usually just run past these unless I have the stats to take them out.
For a more modern comparison, it feels like playing Vermintide 2 facing a Hell Pit Abomination on Legendary, then two more would spawn right next to you. It just feels like difficulty for the sake of difficulty.
Although you now have new weapons and tools to deal with your enemies. Weapons can now be further improved after being Dragon Forged, which uses Rift Crystals instead of gold. I forgot to mention this, but Rift Crystals are separate from gold. This can be found from enemy drops or from your pawn being used by other users. Because of the latter, I had a ton on my Xbox 360, but for this version, I couldn't get anyone to grab Sif. Instead, I mainly relied on the former. Thankfully, Rift Crystals are far easier to find now than in the main game. From your trek across the dungeon, you'll find cursed items. These can range from simple items to new exclusive equipment. You can even get some new augmentations for your vocations, furthering the customization. In order to find out what exactly these items are, you'll need to have the lady to purify these items, once again requiring rift crystals. The RNG gods tend to be in your favor, as I was able to get incredibly strong from this.
Praise Sigma.
Honestly feel like I can talk about this game forever, but I'll stop here because I want you all to experience the game for what it has to offer. Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen is a great game that I can easily recommend. The combat is amazing, the music is superb, and the journey to the end is all worth it. While the narrative itself is lacking, as well as some of the main quests and graphics, it certainly more than makes up for it with sheer satisfaction and a strong sense of accomplishment.
It's a shame that we don't have any sequels, prequels, or any spin-offs to this game that aren't anime based. But hopefully with this anime, maybe there's hope for the future. Speaking of, I have to finish that episode with Uncle Ramon.
You must run your soul through its eye.
We need to bring it down to our level then.
As you request.
You know, I never thought you'd be into anime with that Bloodborne cosplay that you have. Comprende?
The hell is going on here?
Hey, Papa, thanks for joining us, man. You came just in time. You want to join our watch party of 2?
Did you forget this dude tried to kill us last year? You know what? Honestly, I'm glad you brought him here, so I can repay the favor myself. And I know I don't got my broom, but I'll beat your ass with this hammer. I don't know if it's supposed to be Sigma.
Hey, I don't want any violence to start out this year, Papa. It's a new year. Why don't we come together in peace and tranquility? We can resolve this in another day. Comprende?
You know what? Fair enough. This guy could kick my ass anyways.
Man, why you keep calling him that? That's not his name. His name is Mr. Crow. Comprende?
All right, Mr. Crow, it's a pleasure to meet you. And to everyone else, happy belated New Year. And this is Pow3rh0use signing off.